Welcome to Faith in 5, a weekly video devotional designed to discuss practical spiritual concepts in 5 minutes or less. I'm your host, Mark Vandella. Picture the quintessential, removed from everything, edges of the earth cabin in the woods. It's pristine, it is quiet, there's water, and it just feels so peaceful and calm. For me, that place is a Young Life Camp. Young Life Camp happens to be the place where I first really heard about a relationship with Jesus. But every time I show up on a Young Life Camp, it essentially provides that feeling that we get if you really took time to think about that place of peace and calm. For me, when I step foot on a Young Life Camp, it just feels like God is there. And I don't necessarily hear him, but I feel him, and it feels like I can then hear him. And we're in the 5th week of our series based on Bob Goff's book, Everybody Does. And in one of his chapters, Bob describes his lodge. And he describes it as he's describing it. I just went to a Young Life Camp because he talks about the waterfalls and the streams and the beautiful silence. And he admits in his book that that's the place where he hears God. But he says, I don't actually hear God, right? I don't hear this audible something from God. But for some reason, all the other stuff in our lives gets just removed. And for the first time, I'm paying attention enough to feel God and thus hear God. The problem with most of our faith is that in our lives, we don't like hearing, we don't like being told what to do. And if somebody were to tell us exactly what to do, we probably would do the opposite anyways, or we'd try to figure it out on our own or do it our way. But then in our faith, we behave and we kind of wait on God to tell us what to do. And this doesn't make any sense. And I'm guilty of this for sure, that it's like, I don't know, God, please just tell me. But we know that if he told us, we'd probably still do whatever we wanted anyways and figure it out as we go. The nice thing about God is he understands us because he created us. And God says, go do, and I will come with you. And I will help you along the way. I will help you discern. I'll help you figure it out along the way. And most of the time when we don't hear God audibly, we think that he's not there. We think that he's distant, or we think maybe even that he's indifferent. Bob says in his book that God's silence isn't indifference. God's silence is trust in us, and the problem is us trusting in God because we wait for him to tell us, knowing full well we don't want anyone to tell us what to do. So there's this unique battle that we play where God is saying, I trust you. I love you. You go do, and I will come with you. And we sit on the other side saying, I don't know what to do. I'm not exactly sure what God would want me to do. And so we wait, and we don't take action. Uniquely in Romans 10:17, it talks a little bit about this. The verse says, before you trust, you have to listen. Now, that seems contradictory to what I'm saying in terms of like God isn't going to show up with this big audible booming voice. But if you think about the going to a camp, a remote place, and clean up all that stuff that distracts us, that's where we finally feel the presence. We have to listen. We have to create spaces where God can show up. And in doing so, when we create places for God to show up, it's usually when we take action and go do, and he comes alongside us. The verse goes on to say, but unless Christ's word is preached, there's nothing to listen to. And if you stop and think about Christ's words, what Jesus came here to do, he didn't just preach, and tell us all these things to do. Jesus was the example of with. Jesus came here to do life with us, to live among us, and to show us so that we would learn and then go do ourselves. And so the unique part of this battle with our faith is if we really desire to be closer to God and we desire to emulate Christ, which helps us, again, grow closer to God. Instead of sitting and waiting, we should take steps towards what we already know. God isn't sitting there waiting to correct us or to tell us what to do. God is more silent than maybe sometimes we would desire because he wants us to take steps, to go do, and he trusts us in that process. God isn't waiting for us to screw up to tell us what needs to be fixed. God doesn't feel like he needs to. He trusts us and knows that we're more equipped than we think we already are. The truth is, God believes that you are already enough. You have enough. You have what it takes. He wants us, he created us to engage with this earth, to show other people that they are also enough and that what we have is enough for God. This week, as you live out your faith, consider the places that maybe you've been pushing pause and waiting for God to say, go do this. Take a step in that direction and watch God show up. Take a step in that direction and maybe you'll learn, no, that isn't a place. Maybe that was the wrong decision, but that's what it takes. That before we trust, we have to listen. Before we trust, we have to take a step in that direction. And then we start to kind of do life alongside God, which develops trust. It's not God's trust in us that's the problem. It's our trust in God that's the problem. So trust in God and take the first step and watch and take note of where he shows up.